see. Heidi, would you start us with a prayer, please, today?
You bet.
Thank you.
Our dear eternal Father in heaven, as we come before Thee before we begin class today, we ask for Thy blessing to be upon us as we discuss these things of the French Revolution. We ask that we may be able to clear our minds of other things that may be clouding our thoughts at this time, that we may be able to study and think clearly on these things that we are to be taught. We also ask Thee to please help us to be able to understand things in a manner that would be helpful to us at this time. We're grateful for this opportunity we have to learn these things in light of the restored gospel. We're so thankful for Mr. Gentile and his willingness to share this information with us. And we say these things most humbly in the name of our Savior, Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen. Thanks so much for your prayer, Heidi. Okay, well, today we have a really interesting document, and I'm excited to talk about it. We have Jean-Jacques Rousseau, The Social Contract, 1762. So as you may notice, this is a little bit before that classical phase of the French Revolution, which is, you could say maybe 1789 to 99, somewhere in there, those 10 years. But this document will be incredibly influential on the French Revolution, and one of the things that I'll ask you to look for today is why. Why would it be so influential? And of course, we'll talk about that as we do our 4Ring all throughout the lesson today. But let's talk a little bit about Jean-Jacques for a second here. So 1712 to 1778, so like Montesquieu, he would not live to see the French Revolution, but yet he had an influence on it, as I said. He did almost everything under the sun. Once again, we have a man with time on his hands, with means, and so a political philosopher, and perhaps the most famous of the French Enlightenment philosophes, or philosophers. He also wrote novels. He was a playwright. He was a composer. He was erudite in music theory and language theory, and wrote education theory on child-centered learning, and just incredibly influential. A really fascinating character. I'm not sure if you know this or not, but he actually wrote the music to one of the hymns in our current hymn book, number 163, Lord, Dismiss Us with Thy Blessing. Has anyone noticed that before?
Nope, I didn't.
No.
No. Well, anyway, so next time you sing it, you can think of Rousseau and the music that he wrote for it. The social contract then, and I think it's very interesting as we look at this piece. If you were confused at times, or if you felt that there were contradictory messages sent, don't worry, you're not alone. It really is noted for being paradoxical, sort of saying two things at once. And notoriously difficult to interpret. There are very few people who say they really know what Rousseau meant, and if they say that, that's usually a flag to you that maybe they are not quite as sure as they think they are, because he's really somebody who lots of people like to interpret for different reasons. And like I said, he says so many different things at the same time. Well, he's a product of the French Enlightenment, so once again we have a person who's saying, well, now that we feel that reason can trump other ways of knowing, let's try to reason out answers to everything. Not only things in the hard sciences, physics or chemistry, etc., but let's try to reason out laws, scientific laws for things like history or literature or sociology, etc., etc. And so once again, we have this book trying to explain, okay, how does government work? Why does it work? What's best? Let's look at case studies, etc., etc. It's sold extremely well. And once again, like Montesquieu and like so many people we've talked about, he didn't say much that was terrifically new, but he said a lot of what he said better than others had said it before. And he said it at a time in which it would be freshly quoted again and again, so that his views on this social contract would become very, very famous. And so old ideas in fresh ways that will be remembered and quoted by this French revolutionary generation. And then also he especially stressed the role of the common people in political morality. And because of this, that's why he's much more popular today than somebody like Montesquieu, just because of all of the implications that celebrating the common man has for lots of different groups these days. Okay, well, let's start our reasoning then. I was thinking about some way to try to draw out some more rich conversation, and I was thinking that having the quotes actually up on the page, that might help. We'll see how that works today, along with our 4Ring. So let's look at this quote here. and read it to ourselves, and then ask ourselves this reasoning question: what was Rousseau's purpose for writing the social contract?
Well, I guess they were still under a monarchy when he wrote it,
Mm-hmm.
and I guess he was not thrilled with that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. So first of all, right, we have this absolute monarchy in France. People have been trying to figure out what to do about it, but the French monarchs have had so much consolidated power that they've been almost impenetrable. But now, in the 1760s and 70s, and especially the 80s, we start to see lots of chinks in the armor, and we'll see what happens because of that. Excellent observation. What else? Why else might he be writing this?
Just to confuse us in this century, because I did not understand it. I felt like I was reading a different language.
Uh-huh.
Me too.
I just thought, okay, I hope you explained this well, because I just kept reading sentence over and over again, thinking, this makes no sense to me. I can't. Every once in a while, I'd come across a paragraph. Like if he was sort of telling a story, I could understand what he was saying. But other than that, I was just like, what is? I couldn't understand it. It was just way over my head.
Yeah. Well, hopefully, then, the goal for today will be to understand it and get something out of it. And let's make sure that that happens through our 4Ring process. And let me know how I can help along the way. Well, I think it is interesting here. If we look, he says, man is born free. Rousseau really celebrated, because I told you he had lots of theories about education. In fact, one of the books he's most proud of was the book about education called Émile. Anyway, and he really had a very positive view of human nature. He said, hey, we're born free. We are born good. We are born with lots of innate gifts, and so that's why he celebrated the common man. But yet, everywhere he is in chains. And so there are many reasons why he's in chains. Wendy talked about one of the biggest, right, this monarchy. Also, of course, we have things like feudalism. Also, we have a state religion imposed. And so we see all these different types of shackles put on this common man that has so much potential, but whom Rousseau thinks is really just tied down. And so he's going to write, how can man live in society and express these great potentials within him? Well, if we look then, of course, he starts to talk about some political theory. Now this one, I hope, will seem pretty familiar to us. Let's see. Christina, would you read this for us? And then let's try to reason together what political theories does he restate here.
If I took into account only force and the effects derived from it, I should say, as long as a people is compelled to obey and obeys, it does well. As soon as it can shake off the yoke and shakes it off, it does still better. For, regaining its liberty by the same right as took it away, either it is justified in resuming it, or there was no justification for those who took it away. But the social order is a sacred right, which is the basis of all other rights. Nevertheless, this right does not come from nature, and must therefore be founded on conventions.
Okay. What is he saying?
This sounds like Locke.
Yeah, you get it. Exactly. Right? So Rousseau is France's Locke. And what is he saying here?
Well, what? The social order is a sacred right? Oh, and is the basis of all other rights.
Mm-hmm. So this social order, so entering into society, he's saying, is the right, and whose right is it to enter into society, if they choose?
Each individual's.
Yep, individuals, and you could say, so quote unquote, the people, right? The people can choose to enter into political society, and entering into that political society gives them, their other rights, because the whole reason why they entered into political society was because those natural rights were not being protected. Right? So if you remember Locke, right, let's go back to those 5 big ideas. How does this relate?
That we have the right to order into a social contract.
Mm-hmm. Excellent, right? And how would you explain, Heidi, in your own words, this social contract? What is it?
Well, it's partly giving away your power to someone else because you want them to help you out in specific areas.
Mm-hmm.
Like
Excellent.
law enforcement or whatever.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I love how you said giving away your power, right? Governments don't exist should not exist, okay, in and of themselves. They have no legitimacy. But the people give them legitimacy, power on loan. Excellent, right? And that power is to protect natural rights, right? Because those were the rights that were enjoyed in that state of nature. But then through people through people basically using force or what you could call will to take away those rights, people realized that there was a need to have somebody be a judge, somebody be an enforcer of law. And so we entered into this contract to protect ourselves. Well, let's
Can I ask
keep
a
going.
question, though?
Sure,
What does the
please.
last sentence mean out there where it says, nevertheless,
Mhm.
okay, yeah,
Yeah, so
nevertheless, this right does not come from nature and must therefore be founded on conventions. I didn't understand that at all.
Yeah, so basically he's talking about the right to form a social order, the right to enter into political society. He's saying that we don't have government in the truest form of nature because we're all well self-governed and natural rights are protected. He said, but we have these conventions, meaning we have to make them up ourselves, these governments that we have, because they're not with us in nature. And so all government is a creation, is an invention of the people.
Okay.
That's a great question. Okay, so here he talks about the natural man, and this is not quite the same natural man as Mosiah 3:19, but let's reason together. Why does the natural man, as Rousseau called him, man in a state of nature, have to leave that state of nature and enter into political society? And hopefully this will sort of flesh out what we've been talking about a little bit more. Walter, welcome, and would you like to read this for us?
Sure.
Thanks.
I suppose men to have reached the point at which the obstacles in the way of their preservation in the state of nature show their power of resistance to be greater than the resources at the disposal of each individual for his maintenance in that state. That primitive condition can then subsist no longer, and the human race would perish unless it changed its manner of existence.
Okay, excellent. So what is this saying here? Why does he have to leave the state of nature to enter into political society?
Are you asking anyone?
Yes.
Just that you spend so much time defending your property that you can't survive eventually.
Hmm?
You need help preserving your property.
Excellent, right? Excellent explanation, Wendy. I really like the way you talked about how really there comes a point where it's too much to do on your own and you need help. And so, there's this constant juxtaposition between obstacles and then resources, right? And so he's saying in the state of nature, when the time comes that the obstacles to preserving your natural rights are greater than the resources that you have at your disposal, then it's time to change your manner of existence, meaning it's time to go from this state of nature to political society. Creation of laws, creation of government, creation of a judge, power on loan to the judge so that person can enforce laws that will protect natural rights. Excellent. Okay, well, here we have the social contract as a solution to the problem, just as Heidi was talking about before. And remember, the title of Rousseau's book is The Social Contract. And so let's reason together then, how would Rousseau say that the social contract provides a solution to this problem? And let's see. Wendy, would you read this one for us, please?
The problem is to find a form of association which will defend and protect with the whole common force the person and goods of each associate, and in which each, while uniting himself with all, may still obey himself alone and remain as free as before. This is the fundamental problem of which the social contract provides the solution.
Okay. So how would Rousseau explain this social contract?
Well, I think he's implying that there need to be some limits on this social contract, that it serves to protect, but it shouldn't take any more rights than necessary.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. And actually, he said something very interesting related to what you said, Wendy. He talks about how, when you enter into this social contract, you unite yourself with others under government, right? But this is a very interesting concept. The theory behind this is that through uniting, that you remain as free as before. Now, what do we think about this? Because this is really an interesting concept. Is that possible?
Well, not entirely. You have to give up some of your rights when you join in with someone else. But I think what he's saying, like Wendy said, you are trying to give away as little as possible and still remain yourself as free as possible as an individual.
Definitely, right. So, you're both exactly right. At least about, if we think logically about, right, this government that man enters into, right. Of course, I mean, theoretically, you would hope that a government would be so good at doing its job that you would remain as free as in a state of nature. But at the same time, I mean, if you think about it, to protect my, say, property. For the government to protect my property, I have to give away some of my property in things like taxes. So you can't quite be as free. You maybe are close in an ideal government, but anyway, this is interesting. He says each man, in giving himself to all, meaning entering into this political society, gives himself to nobody. And as there is no associate over whom he does not acquire the same right as he yields others over himself, he gains an equivalent for everything he loses, and an increase of force for the preservation of what he has. Do you agree or disagree with Rousseau, and why?
I disagree.
And tell us.
Because you're not always going to agree with everybody about what's the best way to protect life and liberty and property, and so there's a lot of concessions that take place.
I do think a lot of people would agree with this, though, because I think a lot of people think, oh, what we give up is completely worth what we get back. Because it's sort of like the whole idea where we've talked about giving up your freedom for what you think is a benefit, and others don't see it as a benefit. So I think people are always going to disagree on this.
Oh yeah, definitely, and totally right. It's interesting just to point out that he would feel so passionately about this. I mean, in his theorizing. Remember, I mean, we're reading a lot of philosophers. I mean, right? This is, what things look like at 10,000 feet in the air. But on the ground, things can be very different. And so if we look here, I mean, do we really gain an equivalent for everything we lose? Well, certainly debatable at best, right? And I think the answer would be no most of the time. Okay. Well, excellent reasoning there. Let's relate then. So can you think of an experience or an example of Rousseau's social contract, his ideas about it, not working?
Well, yeah. Okay, for instance, Social Security. You're supposed to give all this money so that you get something back in the end, but it's not really working out that way, so it's not worth what you gave. You would have been better off taking the money and investing it yourself than you were to ever give it over to the government.
That's a great specific example, Heidi. Thank you for that. Any others?
Well, I just can't figure out what he thinks I'm gaining, what rights over others he thinks I'm gaining. The only thing I think that I'm gaining would be in comparison to anarchy. Then I can see that I'm making some gains because I've gotten out of anarchy.
Right.
But that doesn't seem to be the rights that I'm gaining that he's referring to. So I don't know.
Right. Yeah. Well, it is interesting because you really have to ask yourself the question: at what point in the transition from state of nature-ish life, of course this is all theoretical, to life under a social contract, at what point is there a benefit? How bad does it have to get, etc.? Go ahead.
Is he referring to things as basic as, well, what about roads? You want to have a road that's paved to drive on, so you're willing to give up your taxes for that, and that's a benefit. Is he talking about exchanges as simple as that?
Well, if you see, this is where their concept of government was very different than ours today, because we think of the government providing roads, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But these philosophers, really, they were going back to the basics. They're going back to natural rights, basically the, property, life, and liberty. And so, I mean, if you say, which of course you could certainly, that, oh, well, roads protect my life, or they protect my property, or they somehow protect my liberty. I mean, if you want to extend it that way, then you could certainly say that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but I mean, today people would use that argument as far as they would say, well, I would much rather have a road that's paved than not pay taxes for it. Mm-hmm. Wouldn't they use that argument today?
I'm sure a lot of people would. At the same time, I think it would be interesting to see what people on the other side would say, saying, well, I'd rather build my own road as a community, go into a co-op or something where, we pay for it ourselves, and then that way we can control the cost, and then we keep up the maintenance, and so, if we don't like the way it's being maintained, we can fix it rather than waiting for the government to do it, even though we pay the same amount of taxes for roads that are terrible or roads that are excellent, et cetera, et cetera. So.
Okay, so Rousseau was talking more about actually the protection of life then? And
sure,
did they
yeah.
have that? I mean, did they have a police state back then? Did they really have that much protection? I mean, that's the thing that I wonder.
Right. Well, I mean, if you think about it, these powers in Europe were constantly fighting, and so they lived in an age where, they were hearing the king say, "I am going to protect France, against the Netherlands, against England, against, Spain, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera." And so, I mean, they very much did see that some government was there to protect them. Now, at the same time, of course, then there's always the question of, wait, well, how much of this is to protect me versus how much of this is to expand your own empire, king? So
okay,
yeah.
so that protection would come more under the military than it would something closer to you, like your city police force or something.
Right, even though there certainly were royal police forces as well that would administer justice, hopefully, at the county level and at the town level, etc.
Okay.
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, let's look at this one there, because he says some very interesting things about sovereignty. And in fact, Rousseau's contribution to political theory about sovereignty is probably some of his most powerful rhetoric. So let's look at this here. And Caden, welcome. Would you like to read these two bullets for us?
Yes.
And let's ask ourselves, what does he say about sovereignty, and specifically look for what does he state is sovereign?
Okay. Each of us puts his person and all his power in common under the supreme direction of the general will, and in our corporate capacity, we receive each member as an indivisible part of the whole. Do you want me to keep on going?
Please.
Okay. At once, in place of the individual personality of each contracting party, this act of association creates a moral and collective body, composed of as many members as the assembly contains votes, and receiving from this act its unity, its common identity, its life, and its will. This public person, so formed by the union of all other persons, formerly took the name of city, and now takes that of republic or body politic. It is called by its members state when passive, the sovereign when active, and power when compared with others like itself. Those who are associated in it take collectively the name of the people, and severally are called citizens, as sharing in the sovereign power, and subjects as being under the laws of the state. What does Rousseau? Okay.
Thanks. Great job reading, Hayden.
Thanks.
So what's sovereign?
Well, isn't he saying the people are sovereign?
He is. He is saying the people are sovereign, and especially, though, there's a specific phrase that Rousseau used again and again and again. In fact, he's very famous for this phrase. It's two words that he talks about as the people's sovereignty. It's the truest expression of it.
The general will?
Is it public person or individual personality?
It is general will, actually. Was that who? Was that? Let's see. Who was that? Who's the general will? Oh, Christina.
That
yeah.
was Christina.
Oh, okay, sorry. I heard a couple people talking at once, and I couldn't discern. But yeah, no, it is the general will. Now, this is a very interesting concept, and this is actually one that people debate a lot about in terms of what Rousseau really meant by it. But yeah, the general will of the people. Now, just curious, what would you predict the general will of the people is or should be, according to Rousseau?
The common good?
Yeah.
Common good? Yeah, that's a great prediction. And let's look. Oh, go ahead.
Nothing. No.
Okay.
I didn't get a. I didn't read the readings. I don't know
Okay.
so I don't know if my input would be pertaining to what we're trying to reach for right now.
Oh, okay. Well, we've got lots of quotes here, and so when
Okay.
we read those, feel free to jump in with them.
Okay.
Well, there's a definition here from an Encyclopedia of Philosophy that is pretty good, pretty helpful, I think, in trying to start to grasp this concept of the general will. The notion of the general will is wholly central to Rousseau's theory of political legitimacy. It is, however, an unfortunately obscure and controversial notion. Some commentators see it as no more than the dictatorship of the proletariat, the working class, or the tyranny of the urban poor, such as may perhaps be seen in the French Revolution. Such was not Rousseau's meaning. This is clear from the Discourse on Political Economy, where Rousseau emphasizes that the general will exists to protect individuals against the mass, not to require them to be sacrificed to it. He is, of course, sharply aware that men have selfish and sectional interests which will lead them to try to oppress others. It is for this reason that loyalty to the good of all alike must be a supreme, although not exclusive, commitment by everyone, not only if a truly general will is to be heeded, but also if it is to be formulated successfully in the first place. So with this, then, what is the general will?
The general will sounds like it's made to protect everyone's rights, and instead of see, a lot of people will look at the common welfare and will think of a socialistic point of view, and think that means that we all have to be completely equal, because that's what's good for everybody. But in reality, no one knows what's good for everyone else. It's up to, that's the general will, according to this, I can't remember I don't know who says this, but according to this, is to protect our rights from being influenced by everyone else, kind of. I don't know. That's just what I was thinking.
Yeah, no, and I liked what you were saying, because it really sort of implies that, we can never really get to the general will, but the general will would be something akin to doing what's really best for everybody. Now, of course, once again, he's a political theorist, and so this is an ideal. But let's look a little bit more into the general will, because the scriptures talk a little bit about something similar to it. What do you think they say about the general will being sovereign?
I'm thinking of the scripture that says the majority of the people won't choose evil. That they'll generally do what's right as long as they're righteous.
Yeah, definitely. In fact, I was thinking of that one too. And so, actually, Wendy, would you read that for us?
Thanks for providing the reference.
Okay.
Now, it is not common that the voice of the people desireth anything contrary to that which is right, but it is common for the lesser part of the people to desire that which is not right. Therefore, this shall ye observe and make it your law to do your business by the voice of the people. And if the time, here's the bad part, if the time comes that the voice of the people doth choose iniquity, then is the time that the judgments of God will come upon you. Yea, then is the time he will visit you with great destruction, even as he has hitherto visited this land. Which is why I said, that assumes that the majority usually choose what's right, assuming they're righteous to begin with.
Yeah, excellent qualification, right? They need to be righteous. And it's so interesting because as you read Rousseau, I mean, we'll talk about bits and pieces today, but Rousseau had such a faith, a deep, deep faith in the power of the common person to do the right thing. I mean, he really firmly believed it. But it is interesting to see that, sure, there are many times that when the people are righteous, they will do the right thing. They'll choose the right thing. The majority will. But there are also times when if the majority is not righteous, anything goes, as we see all around us. Well, let's look then a little bit more about sovereignty then. Here's sort of a reason and relate page. I want to read this together, and then I want to think, what do they say here about sovereignty? This will be slightly different than what he talked about before. And then what do you think about what he says? So let's see here. Walter, would you read this for us, please?
Both paragraphs?
Would you read the first one, please? And then actually, Christina, would you read the second one?
Okay. Hold then that sovereignty, being nothing less than the exercise of the general will, can never be alienated, and that the sovereign, who is no less than a collective being, cannot be represented except by himself. The power, indeed, may be transmitted, but not the will.
And Christina, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. Sorry.
Okay.
In reality, if it is not impossible for a particular will to agree on some point with the general will, it is at least impossible for the agreement to be lasting and constant, for the particular will tends, by its very nature, to partiality, while the general will tends to equality. It is even more impossible to have any guarantee of this agreement, for even if it should always exist, it would be the effect not of art, but of chance. The sovereign may indeed say, I now will actually what this man wills, or at least what he says he wills. But it cannot say, what he wills tomorrow I too shall will, because it is absurd for the will to bind itself for the future. For it is incumbent on any will to consent to anything that is not for the good of the being who wills. If, then, the people promises simply to obey, by that very act it dissolves itself and loses what makes it a people. The moment a master exists, there is no longer a sovereign, and from that moment the body politic has ceased to exist.
Okay. So really interesting things here. Really interesting. So what is he saying here about sovereignty?
I think if the people, I think what he's saying is if the people refuse to think for themselves, and like let's say a nation at first, the people are sovereign, but I guess it's saying that the people by choice can give away their sovereignty to a tyrant or someone else if they choose that. And they may indirectly choose that by their ignorance, in my opinion. I think people can give away their sovereignty, not realizing.
Well, actually, though, Caden, one thing that's really important is Rousseau is saying you can give power to other people, but you can never give away your sovereignty.
Oh, okay.
But yeah, but if you use the word power, keep going with that.
Okay, well then people can give away their power, but wouldn't that affect? Okay, what's sovereignty? Let's define sovereignty.
Sovereignty is the ultimate power or authority. And so think of it this way. Basically, it's like, I can give power on loan. I can loan it to a president. I can loan it to a representative, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But really, Rousseau is saying here that if that person stops to do what he or she should do, if this social contract starts being violated, I have every right, because I'm ultimately still the sovereign, still the ultimate authority, to pull out and start anew. There should never be a situation where, at least theoretically, where I give sovereignty away to a king, because the king is just one man. He's not the people, and the people are truly sovereign. Does that make sense?
Right.
You can say, for a time, I want to have a king rule, but if it doesn't work out, then you take that power right back and do with it what you please in a new social contract.
Yeah, that kind of goes back to our agency as well. Like, we always have our agency. No one can fully take away our will, our agency. Okay, well then in this case, I guess people can give away their power, but what does it mean when he says there is no longer a sovereign? Yeah, just because if the people are always sovereign. Okay, I'm confused. I'm gonna think for a second. Let me think. Hold on.
Okay.
You can just move on. I need to think about this for a second.
Okay. Well, it might become clearer if we go here to this next page, because actually this is a little shorter, perhaps a little more easy to understand. Wendy, would you read this one for us, please?
Sovereignty, for the same reason as makes it inalienable, is indivisible, for will either is or is not general. It is the will either of the body of the people or only of a part of it. In the first case, the will, when declared, is an act of sovereignty and constitutes law. In the second, it is merely a particular will or act of magistracy, at the most a decree.
Okay. So what is he saying here about sovereignty? This explains exactly what Caden was wrestling with.
Well, it seems like sovereignty is like the will of the majority of the people. Is that kind of what he's saying?
Well, Maybe, maybe. It depends on if it's a general will or a particular will. Meaning if it really is what's best for the people, or if it's only a majority tyrannizing a minority. And that would be a
So
particular
who decides what's best for the people, though? Because maybe a group of people might think it's best for them and it's
will. Right.
not.
Well, in this book, Rousseau does. Basically, Rousseau has said, I think that certain things are good for everybody, and so when the people really, really choose according to these things what's really in their best interest, and if it really is, they'll know it. Well, of course, that's where it gets kind of sticky, right? But if we want to step back for a second and give Rousseau a little bit of credit, we could say, okay, if the people really live according to gospel principles, and if the people really vote in a way that would establish Zion, are they not voting according to the general will, what's good for everybody? Even though some people might not agree, but if it's really best for them, right? And so that's where you have this notion of truth, which we believe in, and the plan of salvation, which we believe in, which are for the whole world, not just a particular group of people. And so that's where Rousseau would say, if you had a people that had a governing body of absolute truths and they all voted according to it, that would be the general will, what's really best for people. But on the ground, as he does acknowledge, this almost never happens, and it's really hard to achieve. And so that's why you have so many cases in history of particular will being exercised, the will of one man, one king, the will of a president, who is not acting in the best interests of the people, et cetera, et cetera. And so, it's an interesting concept.
You're saying Rousseau acknowledges that this very rarely ever happens?
Yes, he does.
Okay, so does he realize that it's righteousness that makes the difference between whether it works or not? I mean, I think this works really well in a terrestrial or better society, but to me that's the determination of whether or not this idea will work.
Right. Yeah, and that's the great question, because as you read him, like I said, he has such faith in the common man to be all things virtuous, basically, that he said that, I just believe that if people were given the chance by government, if we could throw off the shackles of kings, of feudalism, of a state church, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, then the people's virtue could really be manifest. Now, this is wishful thinking in many ways. This is pure philosophy in many ways. This is pure theory in many ways. This is just idealism in many ways. We can pull out nuggets of truth. For example, we do believe in Zion. We believe in a millennium, et cetera, et cetera. And we'll see some of these things in some forms, but of course not exactly in the way that Rousseau hypothesizes about them. But this was his best shot about what makes a good society. And, I mean, the reason why we're studying is because it would be so influential on France and the revolution. And so, for example, when he says something like, sovereignty is inalienable, meaning, you can't give it to anybody else. No one can take it from you, even though you can give power on loan. It's indivisible. You can't divide it. You can't have the people be sovereign and the king sovereign at the same time, because it will just end up pitting one will against another. If there really is one general will, it's indivisible. And so once again, really, you have to keep in mind these things are pie in the sky type of reasonings. But like I said, they were influential. Well, so what do you think about his ideal government then? If we relate this, would it be a republic, a democracy? Why? Keep in mind ideal.
Well, I'm thinking he thought it could have worked in a democracy. Mm-hmm. But again, I think I think he left out the key point, which is that the people have to be virtuous for this to work.
Yeah, well, that's right. Well, and it's important to know, and that's a great comment, Wendy, because it's important to know about Rousseau. So he was Calvinist, then he converted to Roman Catholicism, then he reconverted to Calvinism. Then towards sort of the last decades of his life, he was a deist, where he said, I believe there was sort of a supreme force at the beginning to create things, but God was sort of like a great watchmaker who wound us up and then sent us spinning off and then went and took a long nap. And he believed very strongly that religion was important in giving public morality, but that it didn't matter what religion you went to because all truth was just as good so long as it tended to help the common person become virtuous. And so very, very, I mean, moral relativism, at its finest, finest in quotes, and so that maybe shed a little bit more light on why he wouldn't come right out and say,
Yeah,
you have to have this.
Well, he's a product of the French Enlightenment.
Exactly, and in fact, he's probably the most famous of all of them. So all the things that perhaps we would maybe cringe or sigh about with the French Enlightenment, they were associated with him as well. Even though he also had some pretty creative ideas that are interesting to talk about. Well, it's interesting. If we look here then, his point about good government, once again, think about it. His point about good religion, well, hey, it doesn't matter which church you go to so long as you learn to not steal. Well, the question about good government then, the question, what absolutely is the best government, is unanswerable, as well as indeterminate. Keep in mind, though, this is for someone who wrote hundreds of pages on why democracy was best. But yet, okay, it's unanswerable as well as indeterminate. Or rather, there are as many good answers as there are possible combinations in the absolute and relative situations of all nations. So, what is he trying to say here?
There's no one right answer?
Yep, he's saying that. And what else?
Well, and I actually agree with him. I think the best government depends on what level of virtue your people are at. Mm-hmm. I think there are three best forms of government depending on whether you've got a celestial, terrestrial, or celestial society.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Thank you so much for that, Wendy. That's a great point. So what do we think about this? So Wendy gave us her great opinion. Do we feel the same way?
Well, I think the best government is when Jesus Christ will be our king. Mm-hmm. That's basically the best. But right now, I don't think we'll ever reach the best government. I think Thomas Jefferson said, I can't remember the exact quote, but I think he may have said the best government is the least government. But in different situations, I mean, if the people aren't virtuous and they can't govern themselves, for example, after the French Revolution, or before, I think I remember learning about how Thomas Jefferson was telling them that they're not ready for a government like America. They're not virtuous enough yet. And so, after the French Revolution, it was proven true that they couldn't handle it yet because they went straight back to a tyranny. Mm-hmm. So I don't know what the best government would be. So it's interesting because I think it's different for every situation.
Yeah, no, it is. It truly is, and of course, I mean, if we read the scriptures, we can see exactly what Wendy and Caden are talking about. Well, let's look at this here. He talked about with this sort of relativity in good government. He pointed to two different groups: the subjects and then citizens. Subjects would be people who are, say, in a monarchy, right? Under a monarchy, and then citizens, to Rousseau, would be someone in a republic, a democracy, that sort of thing. And so here, let's see, Heidi, would you read this quote for us?
You bet. It is not, however, answered because everyone wants to answer it in his own way. Subjects extol public tranquility, citizens individual liberty. The one class prefers security of possessions, the other that of person. The one regards as the best government that which is most severe, the other maintains that the mildest is the best. The one wants crimes punished, the other wants them prevented. The one wants the state to be feared by its neighbors, the other prefers that it should be ignored. The one is content if money circulates, the other demands that the people shall have bread.
Okay, so then if we compare and contrast the subject's views of good government with citizens' views of good government, what do we get from our reasoning?
Well, I did not like this section at all because it just brought up all of the anxiety I have over people's views of government today, that people are just on different sides of the fence about it. And that's why I didn't like him saying that it's unanswerable, because I like answers to things. And I like to think that we could come to I guess I just like one person to be right and then everyone to follow that right way, rather than the debate always being open.
Yeah, well, there is one person who's always right. Well, at least one, right? Heavenly Father, Christ. We do have the scriptures before us. And so there are certain things that we can know with certainty. Somebody like Rousseau, well, he's got some ideas that are kind of cool, some that are not so cool, and some that are good, some that are bad, you know. But in terms of being, is Rousseau true? I don't know. and certainly I'd say no in many ways. But if we think about this, though, I think it is interesting to think about the character of a monarchy versus the character of, say, a democracy. What would Rousseau say about the character of a monarchy and the things important to its subjects, and the character of a democracy and the things important to its citizens?
Well,
We seem to say the
on the
subjects
monarchy.
just kind of. Sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead.
I was just
Go
going
ahead,
to say that he seems to be just saying that citizens want their liberty and subjects want their protection, and that's kind of us. That kind of seems to be the basis, anyway, to everything that they want.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, excellent. You know, and that goes right back to that quote, you know, would you rather have, and this, we can flip it for this here, for the subjects, right? Would you rather have order through slavery, or for the citizens, right, chaos through liberty, right? It's you know, what's most important for you? Being secure, having freedom. There are different characters and different types of governments. So what do we think about these opinions?
Well, I don't think a true democracy always gets you the things that he's advocating here.
Yeah, and we'll certainly see that from the French Revolution. I mean, if this is the theory, right? You could say the French Revolution is the practice, the theory put into practice, and we'll see, you know, what happens.
Yeah,
of
good
course.
point.
Well, if we look at this, he had a very interesting. I don't know if you picked up on this. I thought it was really interesting. He had a litmus test for good government, and he says here, what is the end of political association? Well, the preservation and prosperity of its members. And what is the surest mark of their preservation and prosperity? Their numbers and population. Seek then nowhere else this mark that is in dispute. The rest being equal, the government under which, without external aids, without naturalization or colonies, the citizens increase and multiply the most, is beyond question the best. The government under which a people wanes and diminishes is the worst. So what's his test for good government then?
Population, but
Mm-hmm.
what I think as a product of the French Enlightenment, if he'd have been born 200 years later, he would have felt exactly the opposite, because now overpopulation is considered a bane, you know.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. That's why this is so interesting. But when you're in a country that is, you know, starving for people and has been, you know, oppressed in so many ways by a monarch, you know, absolute governance. You know, yeah, this sounds like such a great thing, but I think it is interesting, though. I mean, on the other hand, right, how does this assertion relate, in a way, anyway, to the plan of salvation?
Well, that was the great promise to Abraham, was increase, you know,
Mm-hmm.
that your family would become greater than the sands of the sea. And
Mm-hmm.
I think it's a good point. I think he's right. I'm just saying that if being an intellectual as he was, he probably would have changed his mind a few years later.
Yeah,
but,
yeah.
But I think he's right. I think we're seeing the effects of that today. Most first world nations have a declining population. You know, their deaths exceed their births, and America's. I think we just went under the break-even point, and I think that's a sign of decline, a civilization in decline. I agree with him on this point.
Yeah, yeah, definitely, and certainly a civilization in decline, you know, for many reasons, you know, and most of those would be straying from true principles, you know, and I mean, if we think about the commandment to multiply and replenish, well,
Yeah.
boy, wouldn't it be great to have a government that really supported that, you know, well, anyway, I don't want to say too much. Okay, but
I have a
okay.
question, though, about that.
Sure, sure.
Nowadays, the decline in population would be more because birth control and abortion. But back then, they didn't really have those means at their disposal. And so if it was because of death or because you were too weak to carry a child or whatever, how can you relate that to them being unrighteous?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah. I think it's interesting because I was talking about, in terms of being unrighteous, I was talking about people today who choose not to have children.
Okay, but what about then when they're saying, does that make sense? How does that relate to them not being, I mean, how would they not have been able to have children? They didn't have the same means we have today of preventing birth.
Right. Are you saying what was the government's part in that?
Well, just even individual. How
Or
could
the
they prevent
medicine
themselves
part.
from having kids?
Wouldn't it be more a function of how many deaths you have? Because you spend so much time in an anarchy preserving your life, and then in a tyranny under slavery, and not, I think it's, back then it was more a function of how many deaths you incurred.
Mm-hmm. Right, right. Well, and that's what because it's interesting, he's talking about population, and population isn't just the number of people who are born, right? Just like Wendy's saying, it's the number of people who can stay on the earth for their full life. And under an absolute monarchy, you have no guarantee that your natural rights, life, liberty, property, would be protected. And without that guarantee, you have population that can be, cut severely just with one stroke of a monarch's pen or sword. So does that make a little more sense?
Not entirely, but we can talk about it in my tutorial because I don't want to take up too much time on it.
Okay, yeah. I think this last thing I say, I think it's interesting because when you have an absolute monarchy whose will goes, right, and there's no checks against that will, and the people's sovereignty is not being expressed, well, then that monarch could say, I want to kill every third person. And then you have a government that's not protecting population because it's arbitrary. Anyway, so that's just one example. Well, I think it's interesting. He talks about election by lot versus election by choice. And he said, this is really, really fascinating. He said that if you have a true democracy, you should just do it by lot. Basically, choose straws, because every person should be just as virtuous as everybody else in a true democracy. And so it doesn't matter who leads. He said, though, in an aristocracy, right, you have to have election by choice because you'll have a society that's unequal. So you will have some people who are better and who have more opportunity, and then others who don't, which is just very interesting conclusion that he had here. Well, let's skip over lot and choice for a second, and then I just want to look at this here as we conclude today. How do you think Rousseau's ideas influenced the French Revolution? And as you answer this question, as you relate it at the end of our class, try to use some of these words in your answers: social contract, state of nature, general will, sovereignty either being inalienable or indivisible, democracy or equality. What do you think?
Well, the people definitely rose up and said, we're going to create a new social contract.
Mm-hmm.
And the general will took over, and I don't know. They had. I don't know how to use the last three words in my answer, but well, I got in a few of them.
Yeah, excellent, Wendy. Thank you for being brave and for your good answer. Who else would like to give it a shot, too?
Well, it kind of seems like they wanted the general will to rule, but I don't know if they really achieved that in the French Revolution.
Right. Yeah, definitely. So once again, right, we've talked about the French Revolution as this case of intent versus reality, right? Good intentions, bad execution, right? They were so swept up in, okay, it's time for a new state of nature experience because we're going to throw off the shackles of this government, feudalism and state church and absolute monarchy. So we're going to have a new social contract. Well, they had a new social contract in 89 and 92 and 94 and 95 and 99 and 1804, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And this whole time they were chasing this elusive concept of the general will. We really want what's best for everybody in a democracy where we can all be equal because we all are born good and with potential, and we're all, virtuous in our own way. And so we should be able to have this equality, and we want to level society. And so let's take down feudalism, let's take down a state church, let's take down an absolute monarchy and nobility, and let's really try to express the will of the people, under the guise of we're the true sovereigns because you can't take it away from us, even though the Louis have tried to say they've had it for so long, and it's indivisible. So really now we're going to exercise it. We're not going to give it to anybody else. In this direct democracy, we are going to try to express the general will. Well, of course they tried and tried again. Didn't work. They went from a king with Louis XVI to an emperor with Napoleon. You could say from that point not much changed. Certainly a lot changed, though, in other ways. And so, once again, it was this great experiment in all of these ideals. And so if we relate this to Alma 38:12, right, bridle all your passions that you may be filled with love, well, I mean, they had these passions, they had many good intentions, but yet they were unbridled. It was a particular will, to be sure, instead of a general will, and we see the results in history. Anyway, so once again, keep in mind we have lots of ideas swirling around, and the people believed that these ideas were so powerful that they could reconstitute society. And think about it. In the American Revolution, in the Glorious Revolution, the power of ideas to change the world. In many ways, the French tried to follow suit. In some ways they succeeded, in many ways they failed. And many of these ideas that they tried to use to change their world came from Rousseau. Anyway, I look forward to our class on Wednesday. And thanks so much for your great participation today. This definitely was a challenging document, but I think you did great things with it, and I hope you're feeling better about it. And if you have questions, please just reserve them for our tutorials this week, and I'd love to chat with you about them. Thanks so much.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah, okay, take care. Bye.
Bye.